Know what to expect. So what we're going to be doing is the following. So we're going to stream a video for you to our leaders, and then we will cross over to the bridge when we get the signal for you to get to understand what exactly is happening at that bridge. Then we will stream until we get another signal that the leaders are coming up, and as they come up, I would ask you to rise. As they come up, I'll ask you to rise for the national anthem. So that's basically the procedure. But I know our leaders are going to get it right? But the most important thing is everybody should be in the room and not moving up and down as they come up. Okay. Makungu, good morning. Morning. Perfect. So can I now ask our health and safety rep, Mr. David Tladi, to come and help us with the briefing. Mr. Tladi, over to you.
Program Director, our distinguished guest, SARS leadership, colleagues and friends, good morning. It is a standard procedure that when we are having an occasion of this magnitude in SARS, we do the evacuation awareness, taking into consideration that we might have guests who don't understand our building. The building in which we are sitting currently, it's Hilton House, it's Linton building, and we are sitting on the second floor. In terms of evacuation, if we need to evacuate the building, we will leave through this door, we will turn to the left, immediate right towards the security, out with the glass door. Next to the lift, you'll see the stairs that are going down. You'll go down through the stairs until you reach the door at the ground floor, and the security will show you out, where we will find this gentleman waiting for you outside, and then he will lead you through that road outside towards the assembly point. Our colleagues who are sitting next door in the overflow area, for us not to create a stampede, we won't allow them to use this exit. They will use the exit next to them. It is the exit that will be opened. They will also go down until they reach that last door, which is the exit door, and then they will find it open as well, and then they will come out here. They will meet with the group that is coming this way, and then this guy will lead you to the assembly point. When we get to the assembly point, we will have communications through the person who will be appointed, the information that will be coming either from the emergency services or the police. We also have the ambulance standing by outside. The ambulance have got a crew. The crew is sitting somewhere here in one of our boardrooms. If there is anyone who feels sick, please contact us so that we can take you where the ambulance crew is. Program Director, as I hand over to you, I hope we won't have a reason to evacuate the building. I hope we'll have an incident-free event, and I wish all of us good luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for that briefing. And yes, we hope that everything goes well. We don't hope for a stampede nor anything like that. So I just want to continue with my briefing in terms of what is it that we need to expect. We are not scheduled to have load shedding, although it can happen, we know. If it does, please sit. We are not going to be going out. Normally, it's going to be dark. As we know, we use this place a lot. It's going to be dark, but we ask you not to panic, but just sit. We will come back in about 5 minutes. Then we should be ready to continue. The other important thing that I want to share is with our media team colleagues. We are going to stream live to the bridge. We would love at that point for you not to record anything when we stream live to the bridge. That is the request that we have for everybody. And to our colleagues, we are also not allowed to take any pictures in this room. So the cell phones should either be off or on flight mode, but not to take pictures. So that is the request. I'm sure I I've done all the briefing that is required, necessary. If there's anything, please, we will be sitting, waiting for the group and the crew to join us. They are running slightly late. So what we're going to do is to start with the recording just now. And as soon as we're done, when they are ready, we'll stream live. And when they're ready again to come up, we will be ready for them. I think so. But in the meantime, you are free to enjoy the small snack in and out for now until we start. And we should be starting at about 10:05. If not, I will let you know. Enjoy. Thank you.
No institution is as central to our democracy as the South African Revenue Service. The work of SARS is transformative and enables government to fund public goods, services, and the underlying infrastructure for economic growth and development. Without our work, the most vulnerable among us would be completely destitute. The well-being of all South Africans is at the core of our work. This is our higher purpose. It is important that the work of SARS is pursued with a level of independence that is beyond reproach and free of any interference. To earn the trust of our public, we do our work without fear, favor, or prejudice. I now invite you to enjoy the journey of 25 years as told through the experiences of some of the amazing women and men who has traveled the SARS road since its inception in 1997.
By the time we got to 1994, post the elections, we didn't know much about governance. We may have thought we knew a lot, and the work that had been done had been focused on the expenditure side. Development economics was focused on expenditure, and we looked at the situation in apartheid South Africa and thought that the savings would be adequate to carry us through. And so we did back of the envelope calculations on defense expenditure and on expenditure on the Bantustans. So there was no single set of systems that would help us understand how to resource what needed to be done.
So our first recommendation, the most important, and on which everything else was based, was a proper tax administration, tax collection unit. And we came to the view at a very early stage of our deliberations that tax policy and tax administration is one and the same. If you don't have a good tax administration, and a good tax collection, then any tax policies you have are fundamentally undermined. So we looked at what is the appropriate structure for tax administration. And we looked at various countries. And the view we came to, we looked at the Reserve Bank. We looked at various other models in South Africa apart from foreign. And the view we came to was a totally autonomous, independent tax administration.
And the creation of SARS itself was quite a milestone for the country, because for the country to drive the transformation and development agenda meant that we had to transform SARS into an organization that would serve the country, that would serve the citizens of the country, that would promote and advance the agenda of transformation and development in the country, which then means tax collection was really important. And if you go back to the history of this country, especially with the homeland history, where tax compliance was very low, because, especially among citizens, because obviously it was a tax system that was structured around the apartheid regime, meant that many people, many citizens in the country were actually not used to paying tax.
Their objective was that I should come into SARS to transform SARS. But what transforming SARS meant at the time for different people was different things. So I was told, for example, by the then Commissioner, Mr. van Heerden, who also welcomed me into the organization, but thought that I was there to do some minor transformation work, and would be given a secretariat and so on to work with. Whereas as I learned more, and I wasn't a tax person, I wasn't an accountant, I wasn't anything, but I could give you Panado tablets. That's one thing I could do. But researching and understanding context at the time, what is the relationship between tax, fiscus, the public, and government functions, one began to realize that this is quite a pivotal institution. The second thing is that SARS had just been created by legislation, which is the first SARS Act, and had combined customs and excise, as it was called then, and the receiver of revenue, as it was called then, into a single organization. But these were two very different cultures. Customs guys had their own way of doing things. The so-called receiver of revenue people did their own thing as well in the way they grew up in the organization. So it was an opportunity to understand a different terrain of work on the one hand, and on the other hand, give meaning to the word transformation, because at that stage in March 1998, SARS was still pretty much looking like its past in terms of layers of management, in terms of the staff component, and if you go through the numbers during that whole period, you'll see how phenomenally it has changed without too many people feeling disgruntled. And that was an opportunity to actually practice activism and the kind of sensitivities we developed as political activists within a vital institution, but do it in an apolitical way.
We come to 94, and obviously government is wanting to improve revenue, because post the sanction, in the sanction era as such, revenue had taken a major drop, and that was part of the transition, and the reason for the transition that the government had to talk because of the financial constraints on the economy. And obviously it was a change. A number of new people being brought in, whether it be Ivan Pillay in those days, Jean Ravelli, and I can name hordes of people that we got to know over that period of time. There were fundamental shifts in terms of how the structure works, and obviously leading to SIACA. And I'll never forget being called in and asked, can I please lead one aspect of SIACA, which was the legal aspects on behalf of Kosi, but for the transition with regards to SIACA. Now, what was the big change with SIACA was moving really from an old processes to new processes.
In year 2000, after I've joined SARS for 3 years, then SIACA was launched, and it was all about rebuilding the organization. It was a moment of transformation of processes, systems, and also people, because you cannot change one and you leave the other. It was all about closing the tax gap, streamlining the processes, and restructuring the entire organization, and mainly to also to improve service delivery for taxpayers.
And then we had a look at and saw how paper intensive all the processes were. In the Modernization program, which the Commissioner at the time, Praveen, had got a vision of, it was so big that we had to try and wrap our hands around this elephant and say, how are we going to eat this elephant? While at the same time not losing focus on the revenue collection. And so we said, okay, now this is where e-filing can make a big difference. So we started to focus on putting these intelligent forms into e-filing. Filling in the information, the majority, was mostly what we already had, lying in another set of pieces of paper that came from what the employers sent us every year in their IOP5s. So we said, is there a way to take this information that's in paper on IOP5s, make it a digital form, and pre-populate the tax return with it? So that began the journey, and that was like the aha moment when people could suddenly, wow, okay, I've got this, the stuff is pre-populated, I just have to really look at it, and again, a large majority of people could just say, yes, that's the right answer.
Capture some of the big changes that I personally sort of was involved in. Maybe I can sort of categorize them in sort of 3 broad categories. I think the first one is sort of measures that were implemented to broaden the tax base of South Africa. Was capital gains tax and the switch from a source basis of taxation to a residency basis of taxation. That the Minister of Finance announced in 2000, those were 2 big measures. During those years, SARS was still mainly responsible for drafting the tax legislation. It was during later years it slowly started to move across to the National Treasury, who are actually responsible for tax policy as such. Then some other important interventions were, there was exchange control and tax amnesty that was introduced in 2003 to give people an opportunity to regularize not just their tax affairs, but also their possible irregularities from an exchange control point of view. Then lots of tax loopholes were closed. We brought in transfer pricing legislation. We overhauled the general anti-avoidance provisions. And we had some major interventions in the financial services industry, especially around banks and the long-term insurers. You know, banks, the effective rates of banks towards the end of the 1990s were virtually 0%. And we had intensive discussions and research done into their effective rates. And SARS teams, you know, with the help of the large business center colleagues at the time, we managed to unwound a lot of those tax schemes. And the same as far as the long-term insurers are concerned. We revamped the full fund approach, fine-tuned the formulas to make sure that they pay their fair share of tax as well. And so much so that the financial industry, I think, year after the 2010 onwards, they actually became the biggest contributor of corporate income tax. And the banks, when effective tax rates moved up, as I say, from close to 0 to in the 20s and so on. And then the Tax Administration Act, that was quite a big exercise, where all the administrative provisions were extracted from the income tax and the other sort of tax laws and consolidated into one single piece of legislation in a logical form, so that all the admin provisions are together and make it easier for SARS also from a tax admin point of view.
It's important to understand why I joined. Because at the time I was in banking in a very strong position to accumulate wealth, earn good salaries. Why would I then give all of that up to join government? Because that tells you more about who I am. For me, coming to SARS was an opportunity to make a contribution to our democracy. Whilst working in private sector is wonderful, the benefits are great, one didn't get the sense that you were really touching the lives of people. And so when the opportunity arose, it was that sense of purpose that in my own mind, and I also have to say in my own heart, was the trigger for saying, I want to join. You know, in Afrikaans we have a saying that says, "Die beste stierlui staan aan wal." And many critics are couch critics. It's easy to be a couch critic. It's much harder to get onto the field and to play. And when you are a player, you will make mistakes. And so that is really what inspired me to come. Secondly, the role was challenging. At the time, I was recruited to set up the first large business center, which was at the time, it was researched by SARS before I joined, by a small project team under the former commissioner. And when they had completed the research and had made the decision to establish such a center, they then started looking for someone who could fill this role. I think, if I remember, that their first conversation was for me taking up a different role, and then when they learnt about my background, my experience in commerce and industry and private sector, they saw a better match, and therefore I then started in August of 2004 as the first executive general manager, we would call them, to set up the center. We were in various phases of recruiting the senior management, and it was early enough for me to begin to shape it, introduce processes. It's actually the first time that I introduced the notion of a junior board at SARS, but when I left, I don't think the idea quite carried. Another interesting anecdote I can share about that was some of my senior managers and technical specialists enrolled to do the master's degree in tax, and they challenged me to do it as well. It was of course difficult because I was part of EXCO. We had EXCO meetings in Pretoria. The large business center was established and set up in then the old portion of Eskom Megawatt Park. And then besides that, as a senior executive reporting directly to the commissioner, your day and your diary is never your own, so you could plan a day in Megawatt Park, and by 7 o'clock you get a call, and you'd spend the rest of the day and sometimes the rest of the week in Pretoria. So it was difficult for me, and I told the team that I'm not going to join them, and they wouldn't let me go. They continued to challenge me, and as I am a sucker for punishment, I decided, let me take up the challenge. I think they all regretted it afterwards when I was able to outperform them in my studies. I love learning. I'm a natural student. I'm not intimidated by complexity, and tax kind of just made sense for me. And because of that challenge, I am one of those odd people who ended up with a third master's degree, and this time in tax. It was really a landmark decision by the then Commissioner, Gordon, and I think began to really establish a different engagement model with large business. So when I look back, for me it was both an inordinate privilege to join SARS in that role and not known at the time that I would come back several years later to re-establish it. To re-establish it. For me, part of the large business center development was one of the CRCA outputs. I think very interesting is this whole practice of proactively phoning taxpayers towards the end of the year in advance of the year end to firm up how much money they would pay as provisional payments on the last day of the month. We really, that was really born in the large business center. We made a few blips because 3 or 4 people would phone the same taxpayer. But we've refined that subsequently. But that's really where we were able to have a better line of sight as opposed to just waiting for what's going to happen on the last day. And after about a year, the commissioner then came to me and said, look, I like what you're doing in the LBC. I want you to do it for the whole of SARS. And at that time, I was then appointed as the first ever chief operating officer that SARS had, to bring together all of the taxpayer engagement functions and particularly lead the overall revenue orchestration role that we have now formalized in the role of a chief revenue officer. And so I think we also then began to look at SARS as an operation, not just as an administrator of laws. I think that was really then also what began to lay the foundation. But I mean, some stories from those years are actually quite interesting, and I'll share one or two of them with you. The first real focused drive for modernization started with the Siaka transformation of SARS. Some of the principles was that we needed to transform SARS from an inwardly focused organization to a taxpayer-centric organization. Now that's easier said than done, but that was really the start of it. Born out of that era also came the compliance model that accepted that you cannot enforce compliance. You have to develop a system that leads people to comply of their own volition, which is why that triangle that we use today was already born out of that realization that to be effective, we had to educate and make taxpayers aware of the obligation. We had to provide a impactful service to them, and then we would have to engage in responsible enforcement. That was the word we used, responsible enforcement. So converting SARS into a complex modern operation was central to that phase of transformation. In that first period of for example, e-filing modernization, I think there are two things that for me still stand out as what guided the way we did that. The first is that SARS needed to deepen its skill and capability to conceptualize and build a technology platform. And then secondly, we use the technology of today, almost 20 years on. We are an organization with significantly deeper competence in building technology platforms, but the technology itself has also significantly advanced, giving us many more options. And so our first attempt at e-filing, for example, was really pseudo e-filing, because it was nothing but a front end. It wasn't an end-to-end process, which meant that the taxpayer submitted their file electronically, but it just fell into the inefficient manual processing behind that. We had about, in 2006, we had about 4.2, 4.3 million returns that were submitted. Most of that came in manually. They came in through the post snail mail, or people dropped them a minute before midnight through the fakkies that we had, the postal boxes, and or they delivered it in an envelope in our branch. And on that final day, we would literally have a mountain of paper returns in envelopes. One night, Tinus, Marks and myself were in the Western Cape on the final day. And our staff really are wonderful. And at the end of the day, Tinus and I went for dinner. But when we left, there was literally a mountain of envelopes that the following morning the staff would come and they would slowly open every envelope and start sorting it and getting it ready for the data capturers to capture it and then to go through the manual assessment process. And after dinner I said to Tinus, let's go back to the assessment center and give our employees a surprise tomorrow morning. And so Tinus and I literally worked through the night. We opened the envelopes, we sorted the returns, We stacked it neatly. And when our employees walked in the following morning, there they came. They left last night, and there was this disorganized mountain of envelopes, and they returned to neatly organized. And it's little things like that that are treasured memories of what we did at SARS. On another occasion, I got a call from the commissioner late one afternoon that he needed something for the minister. I was then Chief Operating Officer. I called all the senior team together, and we said we need to prepare this. And we worked fairly late into that evening, and we realized that we are in trouble. And then I made a decision. I said to the team, they can all go home, have dinner, but we restart at 2 o'clock in the morning. So at 2 o'clock that morning, we all came back to the office, brought our flasks of coffee and whatever pannenkoek or whatever you thought you were going to need, and we literally worked through the night so that by 7 o'clock we were ready to give the report and the feedback to the commissioner. So, you know, that kind of camaraderie, that kind of spirit of we will not give up is what were the foundations of SARS. We were heading for an audit finding one year because there was just a new accounting practice that was introduced where you had to, even if the old practice was you would depreciate an asset until it has no more accounting value, and then a practice was introduced that if it has economic value, you still have to have it, which meant that we then had a huge problem reconciling our fixed asset register to our financial accounting statements. I tell you, we spent weeks sweeping this country, counting every chair, every table, every desk, every laptop, every desktop, every printer, every cell phone. We had to do a physical verification of the asset register. And we did not give up until we could account for every item, perfectly reconcile the fixed asset register to the actual physical verification, and we avoided an audit finding. I must say sometimes, you know, one looks back at those, in the heat of those moments, they were intense. But it's begun to tell the story of why SARS became an admired and respected institution at the time. I spoke about the first phase of modernization, which was really pseudo e-filing. And we only really got in the low tens of thousands of taxpayers who adopted it. Until we realized that the main reason that motivates taxpayers to file early is not compliance, it's refunds. And people who expect a refund, they file early. People who expect that they will pay in, they file late. And what benefit was there if you filed early, but you came into the same manual process, relatively inefficient, and had to wait on average 180 days before you got your assessment? Because that was the average turnaround. Okay, our service charter said 90 days, but the actual delivery was 180 days. And so it was that notion that if we wanted people to adopt e-filing, there would have to be a value proposition, and that value proposition is a assessment that is in near real time and a refund which it is due that is paid literally within hours if you were not selected for audit. And that's really the predecessor of what we today have as e-filing, and the additional value proposition driven now by our notion that the best service is no service is auto-assessment. Well, I mean, you should go and read my letter that I wrote to staff on the first day when I arrived, 1 May 2019, which was a public holiday, and a few of us came to work. That letter gives you a sense of my mindset. And there were a few important messages. The first is I knew I had to be clear where I stood and how I felt about what had happened. That our employees and the public should be in no doubt about the fact that I considered state capture to be real. That I regarded it as having been an intentional set of interventions where the intention was actually corrupt. That the damage to SARS, not just the financial and infrastructure damage, but the erosion of the social fiber in the organization is incalculable and will take years to address. I wanted our staff to know where I stood on that. It wasn't the most popular thing to do. I also said to the leaders that I met in the first few days, they must ask themselves where they stand. And I was very clear. If you were in denial of what happened at SARS, you are either complicit or compliant. In other words, you contributed in one way or other to it, or you are that indifferent that it didn't matter to you. And either one is a dangerous place to be. So I wanted leaders to reflect on where they stood. Thirdly, I also knew that while I had a long list of Nugent recommendations, that I didn't want to only address the past. Ek wou nie net agter uit boer nie. I needed to initiate the building of the future. So I was very clear to the senior executives that whilst I would address some of the senior executives whose names were mentioned in the report, that I was not about to embark on a witch hunt to find out where do people stand and how did they contribute. That I was prepared to draw a line in the sand and accept the bona fides of everyone, make up my own mind about the suitable roles that they could play, and over time I would assign them to roles that I felt was more suited to them. And that was the only space I asked for. And I said, and then it is performance management. Forward-looking, not backward-looking. And I think therein lies also an important aspect for us as society. We have to make some hard choices. We can either spend the next decade fixing the past, litigating it, impeaching it, prosecuting it, or at some point in time we say we're going to draw a line in the sand and build a kind of democracy worthy of our children and our grandchildren. And that's my concern. We tend to do more of the infighting, more of the erosion of the social fabric, and not enough of addressing the real challenges of poverty, inequality, education, employment, and stuff that really is the foundation of a society that is compact in social cohesion, that is clear that it has a system of government and other civil society agents that is ensuring its interest rather than its narrow self-interest. And so SARS in many ways is a microcosm of South Africa. And to the extent that I could influence the direction of SARS, I wanted to be more future-oriented. whilst acknowledging we have to redress and fix the obvious things about the past, I didn't want to spend the bulk of my time only fixing the past and not building the future. So that was my approach.
Media colleagues, we're going to start now. And can I please ask everybody to get into the room so everybody is seated, settled as they come up. And the idea is they'll come through this door. As they arrive, let's all stand up, and they will come through to the podium. And as they are standing, the national anthem will start. So that's basically another element of our proceedings. Okay, so I will await for them to come in. Thank you. Good morning, sir. Good morning. Hello. I'm fine in here. Okay. settle down for the national anthem. Stand for the national anthem. Today is a special day, a day we celebrate our Silver Jubilee, our 25 years of progress. We are coming together to celebrate this nation, to celebrate this organization that is driven by higher purpose and also continue to build and support democracy. I'd like to take this moment to welcome our President to our ceremony, and Mr. Deputy Minister. He's coming. Okay. And our Commissioner, welcome. I would also like to welcome our VVIPs and also welcome our EXCO members, our senior leaders in SARS. And we would also like to welcome the most esteemed guests, and those are our employees who are actually watching all over in South Africa. And the most important guest, I would really like to say thank you to our taxpayer and also our partners and our stakeholders. We welcome you. Please, thank you very much for joining us online. I would like now to introduce myself as a host. My name is Dr. Rebone Kabo. I head Taxpayer and Trader Education in SARS. And on behalf of SARS, I've been tasked to steer the Silver Jubilee ship, by the Commissioner, to its embarkment. I would like to welcome you all to this most anticipated ceremony, to be with us, and please enjoy our day. Before I start with the program, I'd like to request everybody's cell phone to be off and not take pictures. In case we have load shedding, everybody, we don't anticipate to have load shedding. I would ask you to come down. We're not going to go anywhere. And to make sure that we give each other 5 minutes before we start again. But it will be dark. Very romantic. Thank you very much for that. I just want to hand over to our Commissioner. Commissioner, I would like you to come up to the podium to hand over to you the next ceremony that is going to happen until I come back to the podium. Over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Rebone. There's nothing on here. Today is really a very, very special occasion. one of those occasions where, as the Commissioner of SARS, Mr. President, I wish we had a much bigger venue where we could have invited all of our 12,871 staff members to share in such a special occasion, and to ensure that indeed we mark this occasion, the 25th year celebration of SARS, appropriately. And so we are therefore honored and privileged that you lead us in the celebration. We are honored that we have been able to have joined with us today some of the founding architects and some of the initial minds, but also some of the builders, because without a builder, the architect's dreams will never come to reality, to ensure that what we share today is in fact a crown jewel in our relatively young democracy. I often say that we are filled with immense pride when we sing our national anthem. It touches our heart. When we stand beside our flag, as we do today, it gives us a sense of identity. If our Constitution is the expression of our aspiration as a society, and the wonderful resources of the men and women of South Africa and the endowment of our natural resources were the ingredients, then the work of SARS funds and, as it were, bakes the cake of social cohesion in democracy. Because our flag and our wonderful anthem and our world-class constitution would mean nothing if it did not translate into an improvement in the lived experiences of South Africans. I often remind myself of the preamble of our Constitution that says that we come together to heal the injustices of the past and to build a society where every South African can be freed to fulfill their full potential. And when we think of our work, we don't think of our work as the administrators of law. We don't think of our work as making sure that tax policy is transformed into tax aspiration, but we express the reason why we do this as our higher purpose. And that is in the knowledge that the work we do is transformative. It touches the lives of every South African. And in particular, the most vulnerable in society, as we saw during COVID, would be left completely destitute were it not for the resources that is yielded by the work of this wonderful institution we call SARS. In October 1997, when it came into being, many of the men and women who were part of that conception are here today. I think especially of Minister Manuel, who at the time provided direction from the Ministry of Finance and Treasury, and our colleague, Mr. Pravin Gordhan, who I think of as who did the midwifery, gave birth and transformed the Commission's recommendations, the CATS Commission's recommendations, transformed that into a living edifice and gave it stature, gave it its anatomy, but more importantly, gave it its soul. And today we mark 25 years. We've had a bit of a rough ride here and there, but the thousands of men and women who have committed themselves to public service in the most visible form are the people we celebrate today. Many of them have joined, many of them predated, some of them have left and retired, some of them who retired came back. I think of myself, for example, who had the privilege, Mr. President, and your confidence to take on this role in 2019. But we today, as the current leadership of SARS, we stand on the shoulders of the giants who came before us, and we want to thank them for that today. Mr. President, today is a celebration of our democracy. Today is a day where we realize that our true sovereignty comes from our fiscal integrity. We are privileged that we do not count amongst what is known as the HIPIC countries, highly indebted poor countries. We are privileged today to not have a largely eroded tax base, even though we still have challenges to improve our compliance. We today can proudly say that the institution whom we affectionately call SARS provides 90% of the resources needed by government to fund democracy, to provide the public goods and services that our people are entitled to. And for all of that, today we stand here and pause for a moment, privileged, yet filled with immense pride and honor that we are part of this great story of SARS. Those who are in the room are special because they were part of this journey. Those who are connected and not able to attend are special, and they each will have their own story, and every story ought to be told. So we will find ways in the coming days to give expression to this wonderful story of SARS. But for now, and for this moment, we want to reflect and rejoice, because it truly is a moment to rejoice that we can come together today and celebrate 25 years of SARS. And so with those words, I welcome you and hope you enjoy these this morning with us. Mr. President, our Minister of Finance is flying our flag in Washington and could unfortunately not be here today, but I want to share with you a video message that he has prepared to give expression to his sentiments for this occasion, after which I will invite the Deputy Minister, Dr. David Masondo, to make some introductory remarks and to formally welcome you to the podium. Thank you very much. Enjoy the Minister's message.
Greetings to the Honorable President, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, to the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service, Mr. Edward Kiswet, Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. David Masondo, my fellow cabinet colleagues, government officials, and gathered guests. Please accept my humble apology for not being able to join you in person on this most auspicious occasion. It is, however, my honor to convey this brief message of congratulations to the agency as it celebrates its 25th anniversary. A well-functioning revenue agency is essential to achieving our developmental objective of establishing an inclusive and equitable economy. Through the revenues that the agency collects, we are able to fund our developmental aspirations, that of eradicating poverty, investing in physical and human capital such as infrastructure and skills program, and providing the delivery of basic services, which are the backbone of a thriving modern economy. It is for this reason and many others that we view the South African Revenue Services as a critical institution in the overall architecture of our democratic state. SARS collects more than 90% of all government revenues. In addition to its revenue collection mandate and improving tax compliance, SARS also facilitates legitimate trade, connecting our small but dynamic country to international trade. SARS also plays a key role in protecting the integrity of the domestic economy. The founding of the Revenue Service in 1997 through the merger of Customs and Inland Revenue Department of the old apartheid state remains one of the shining moments of our democratic history. It was then that the guiding principle of creating and maintaining a modern organization able to compete with the best in the world in terms of equity and efficiency were cemented. It was also at this time that SARS committed to a culture of integrity needed to maintain the trust of the people. I'm proud to say that over the last 25 years, SARS has lived up to these lofty goals. Year after year, the revenue agency has, more often than not, defied the odds of an underperforming economy and shrinking tax base and delivered more revenue than expected. In the last financial year alone, SARS was able to collect close to 17 billion more than what we had estimated. As the finance minister, this is music to my ears. The agency has managed to achieve this through the hard work and dedication of its staff and through the outstanding effort of its leadership team led with distinction by Commissioner Kisworth. Allow me to congratulate and thank each of you for serving your country with honor and distinction. However, let me also remind you that after the candles have been blown out and the speeches concluded, the hard work of building a capable state with a thriving and inclusive economy must continue. I'm certain that the next 25 years will be equally successful, but the road ahead is not without its challenges. The period of state capture has had an undeniable negative effect on taxpayer perceptions. Failures of governance have had a serious impact on taxpayer morality. The loss of public trust in the organization is a real threat. I'm encouraged by the hard work that SARS has undertaken to implement the recommendation of the Nugent Commission. The agency has already implemented the majority of the recommendations to restore stability to the organization. And we're already bearing the fruits of this effort in improving levels of voluntary compliance. Voluntary compliance reflects citizens' commitment to pay taxes and fulfill their role as good private and corporate citizens. A big part of our fiscal strategy of repairing the public finances and placing them on a sustainable path that will create the platform for faster economic growth relies on an effective revenue collection arm. The turnaround strategy formulated and driven by the SARS leadership to position itself at the forefront of efficiency and service excellence has made tremendous strides, and it has my full support. Lastly, I want to remind all those that have gathered to celebrate the 25th anniversary of SARS about the central role of our democratic institutions. Strong institutions built on the rule of law, integrity, and excellence underpin the collective ideas enshrined in our Constitution. It is these institutions that will outlive us and guarantee the prosperity of future generations. Our institutions should be built to weather the inevitable winds and trials of a young and growing democracy. It is natural that these institutions be tested. There's proof that our institutions are more than capable of overcoming these tests. SARS is a living example of this resilience. Long may it continue. Thank you.
His Excellency, President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, our Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, and fellow members of the Executive, Senior Minister Pravin Gordhan, Mr. Joe Maswanganyi, the Chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on Finance, our host today, Commissioner Edward Kisweta, and former commissioners, Tsakani Maluleke, the Auditor General, esteemed guests, all SARS colleagues present, and those joining us virtually. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Avsheni Dumelang Huyemore. Before I call you on stage, Mr. President, to address us, let me thank you for making the time to celebrate the 25th anniversary of SARS and your continuous support for SARS and the rebuilding of our state institutions. South Africa is behind you and will forever support your endeavors to rebuild our institutions, precisely because South Africans can only thrive under the rule of law, under strong institutions. Without strong institutions, it will be the law of the jungle, the survival of the fittest. President and colleagues, let me say the obvious. Government needs money to do its work. We have to raise money either through borrowing or through reprioritization, cutting certain programs which we are not very good at, triple Ps, but also through raising tax. And as the minister said, SARS contributes 90% of the funding required by our government. And this minimizes our dependence on external sources of funding, which can undermine our sovereignty, as we've witnessed in other countries that largely relied on borrowing. Our tax revenue through SARS work have consistently grown over 25 years by about 10% on a compound annual growth basis. Today, we celebrate SARS 25th anniversary, and SARS has continued to support our democracy. Let me also say the second thing, which is obvious. Raising tax has its own limits. And this has been established theoretically and empirically by one economist, Arthur Laffer, who established that sometimes increasing tax rates can lead to a decline in tax revenue. So you can continue to increase tax, revenue will come in, but there's a tipping point where it becomes irrational for economic agents to pay tax, to engage in economic activities, because a lot of that revenue that they will be generating will be going to the commissioner. And for them, it will become irrational. So there's a limit to the extent to which you can tax a population and have a sustainable fiscal policy. Therefore, the most viable way to raise revenue in order to finance what we have to finance is to grow our economy. It is for this reason, President, that we really appreciate your leadership in dealing with the supply side constraint on our economy through Operation Vulindlela. The supply of electricity, transport logistics, skills, telecommunication, water are critical for our economic growth. It's one thing for the economy to grow. It's another thing for the state to have the capability to receive and collect the revenue. We will therefore make sure that we continuously invest in SARS' capability to receive and collect revenue. Institutions matter, but without credible individuals and people running those institutions, institutions are nothing. It will be amiss of me if I do not thank the people who make this institution work, starting with the commissioner, your management, and more importantly, the entire SARS staff, without whom this institution cannot work. Thanks for serving the nation. Without you, no South African, and I mean no South African, will be able to receive any meaningful service they receive from government. It is now my pleasure to request His Excellency, President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, to address us and share his reflections on this special occasion. And I have no doubt that your words, President, will inspire us and especially encourage the colleagues at SARS to retain their course and rededicate themselves to serve our beautiful country. Mr. President, I now invite you to address us.
Siyabulela nakubafana abancinci intwana zopravini intwana ezincane zingakanana siyabulela phithi sithi halala sibabonile silili abafana abade bathe ngqothu into ebezibizwa ngoprofessor Kisvetter abafana abancinci endithetha ngabo ndithetha into sothina sibo Maxi ndithatha ingqungqumbana nazi intonkazi ojinei bophathi yathi zithetha ngathi thina bahlobo bakaSARS sithi siyayivuma sizayithatha i-higher purpose sizayibeka i-country ibe kwilizwe eliphezulu siyabulela lamaphosa siyabulela nkokheli nakuzo zonke izidweshana ezidwangulu ezilapha namhlanje ndithi halala
Thank you. Really? Wow. Deputy Minister of Finance, David Masondo, Minister of Public Enterprises, Minister PG, as you were being referred to here, Minister Pravin Gordhan, Commissioner of SARS, Professor Edward Kisvetter, Auditor General of the Republic of South Africa, Ms. Tsakani Maluleke, and Deputy Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Mr. Cuban Naidu, Chairperson of the Parliamentary Standing Committee, Mr. Joe Maswanganyi, Director General in the Presidency, Ms. Pindile Baleni, Judge Dennis Davis, Professor Michael Katz rather. I had talk about Marx and I somehow thought of Marx, Michael Katz, and the leadership and the staff of the South African Revenue Service, guests and ladies and gentlemen. She spoke about Nomazele Bala, who is passed away now. He is the one who couldn't pronounce my first name. He used to call me Silili. I met him on the mines. He used to be a gold mine worker, underground worker. And he was one of the most militant mine workers who belonged to the National Union of Mine Workers. And each time the mine management did not want to accede to various demands, be it proper food or working conditions, he would phone me in the office, and at times like 7 o'clock in the evening while I was still there, and he would say, Silili, we are closing this shaft. And he used to work at a shaft that had 18,000 workers. And he would just phone that they are closing. And I would say, why are you closing it? So that nobody goes to work. He would say, no, because they refuse to give us more meat in our food ration. And I said, Bala, is that the reason to close the shaft? He would say, yes, ndiyayivala le shaft. I'm closing this shaft. And then he would lead the workers on strike over things like that and many more other conditions of employment. So thank you for reminding me of Nomazele Bala. It is indeed a privilege to be here and to address you on the Silver Jubilee of SARS. It marks 25 years of success for one of our finest state institutions. When you took us to the bridge, it felt like I was in Houston. I once went to Houston for the launching of spaceships, so I had the one privilege one time, and it is a most impressive operation as you see them press the buttons and a spaceship that goes into space takes off, and you are able to see every part of its movement. And I've often said there are two operations in the world which I think are just second to none. It's a spaceship launch and in Houston, as well as Formula One motor racing, because you have no chance to make an error, to make a mistake. So thank you very much for exposing the bridge, because that just gave me that opportunity of seeing how much of a first-class organization SARS is, that we are able to see in real time what is happening. Even when you have load shedding, you monitor it so closely, and you are able to see your diesel usage throughout the country. That, South Africans, I must say, is most impressive. Even at the presidency, we don't have that. So that's impressive. So we thank you for reaching that level. But for 1 minute I paused, because when the gentleman introduced the work that's done there, he said when the floods happened, we were able to see everything there. When the unrest in July last year happened, we saw everything. And for a minute I paused, I thought, is it all organized here? It's most pleasing to be here with all of you. And as I look around, I see people who in many ways deal with money. And I've been trying to sniff around. I had a flu the past few days, so my sense of smell is a bit gone. So I've been trying to sniff around to feel whether there's money that's smelling here, as all of you deal with money. At the dawn of our democracy in 1994, we consolidated apartheid's governments, the Internal Revenue Customs Department, with the Internal Revenue Customs and Departments of the former homelands. And so the South African Revenue Service was born in October 1997. And earlier in the pre-meeting, we got to hear how this came about, how the proposals came through, and the number of people who played a role, from Michael Katz doing the memorandum or doing the write-up, to Pravin Gordon, to Trevor Manuel, Vusi Chabalala, and many others, and how many of you just did the most wonderful task intellectually and organizationally of setting up SARS. Since its inception, SARS has proven and provided the democratic government with the financial resources to fulfill the promise and the mandate that we had to provide our people with freedom and to create a better life for all. That could never have been done if SARS had not come into its own to be the type of organization that it has finally become. We were fortunate at the time to have had visionaries and astute leaders who brought together different capabilities, who brought together bureaucratic structures and policies to create this most outstanding symbol of hope and what South Africa can be like. And someone was saying, SARS became an exemplar, a real exemplar of what we can achieve as South Africans, in terms of it being the institution that functions so well, and that with that it became world class. And someone was reminding us that SARS was seen and noted and recognized by all and sundry around the world as being the best tax institution in the world. And this was also recognized by none others than the Americans in the US, as they looked at the work that SARS did as it rose to the zenith of its capability. And so SARS was a truly excellent organization. And it is the SARS that you lead today, which you are rebuilding and putting back into the shape that it was, although it went through a very testing period, which I'll talk about in a little while. We welcome today all those who led SARS in its early days, bringing together these varying institutional, political, and socioeconomic outlooks characterized by the deep divisions of the past, must have been one of the most significant challenges that you all who put together the SARS that we have had to face. You were essentially building a SARS from the ashes of apartheid, if that meaning, that statement can get meaning, and that is the meaning that it has, because apartheid was ashes, as it were, and bringing together the so-called homeland internal revenue services was bringing together ashes again. And out of these ashes of our past, you were able to put together an organization like this. And I want to express my gratitude to all who provided the necessary leadership to this glorious institution of our democracy. And many of you are here, and I'm so glad, Commissioner, that you were able to invite the various people who played this role. From its inception, SARS has been guided by a strong philosophical orientation of service, of a higher purpose. That's what has driven SARS to be what it has become, rather than just collecting rands and cents. And there are other many revenue institutions around the world that just collect rands and cents and all that. But you were driven by a higher purpose because you had to raise something from the ashes of our past. The institution has always understood that it is at the center of our efforts to improve the lives of society's most vulnerable. Beyond its revenue and compliance mandate, SARS was created to have a transformative impact. It had to transform this country because we needed the resources to transform the country, and therefore SARS was at the center of it all. This is thanks to the revenue collected by SARS, and you've done incredibly well throughout in terms of the amount of monies that you've collected, monies that have been put to good use to support the lives of South Africans. But during the COVID-19 pandemic, government supported businesses in distress with tax relief measures, and we all know how that was administered by SARS. SARS played a critical and central role with that. These measures were intended to prevent company closures, job losses, and to ensure that the livelihoods of workers could be safeguarded. And at a trying moment in the life of our country, SARS therefore played another critical role. None of these financial interventions that we introduced through the stimulus that we announced would have been possible were it not for the excellent work of the committed employees of SARS. Since its formation in 1997, SARS has been able to collect over 18 trillion rand for government to provide, to fund various programs that have supported the lives of many South Africans. When one compares the amount of 1.6 trillion rand collected by the end of March in 2022, and you compare that to the 147 billion that SARS collected in 1996, 1997, one becomes aware and alive to the enormously impressive work that is done by SARS. Because as one of the staff members who was giving us a presentation was saying, that money that is collected does not just walk through the door on its own. It has to be collected, it has to be followed up, it has to be fetched, it has to be mobilized and brought in. And the most impressive part is the capability that you have built, using technology, using the intellectual prowess of people that you have brought together, and people who are as diverse as we all are as South Africans, to have brought them all together, men and women, young and old and middle age, to bring them all together from different races, and the beautiful diversity of our nation is clearly represented here in SARS. Having brought them together to produce this great and wonderful and outstanding capability speaks volumes of what this institution is all about. Now, this accomplishment is due to the passion, to the commitment and the focus by the staff of SARS, by the leadership, to bring to life the higher purpose that I referred to earlier. In the words of the celebrated newspaper journalist, the late Agri-Cluster, the employees of SARS are truly nation builders. And I'd like you to see yourself as that you are nation builders. If there ever is a nation builder, that's what you are. Because with the rands and the cents that you collect and you encourage people to bring in, you are actually building South Africa. And what I like most is what I heard about the education for taxpayers, that we're educating more and more taxpayers and increasing the tax base and getting more and more of our people to pay tax. I once heard of a fable that our tax base is shrinking and shrinking, and the journalists did deep research and they got the information from yourselves, although they said they waited for quite a while, 6 months or so. In the end, she writes a piece, and her name is Claire Bessica. She says she's found that no, rather than it shrinking, it's actually expanding, meaning that more and more South Africans are willing and coming forward to pay tax. So much as your work as the staff of SARS is to cajole, to encourage all of us to pay, South Africans are coming forward, and this is precisely what we should appreciate about South Africans. I have said on a number of occasions that we must do more to improve service delivery to our people, because our people deserve good service delivery. To root out corruption should be one of our key areas of focus, and to ensure that our economy does recover. Now, all these matters are being addressed with urgency and purpose, and because our people deserve the very best. To the SARS staff, you are our unsung heroes who have continued to carry out your patriotic tasks during trying times, such as during the global financial crisis. A number of you were still here in 2007, 2009. You worked through it, and you had a lot to do then. Our country's economic difficulties, you're working through that and trying all ways to find those rands and cents from taxpayers' pockets. The period of state capture was another period that was most testing for you all. And of course, COVID also presented you with other challenges. And these are some of the challenges that you have had to deal with yourselves. South Africa, therefore, owes you a debt of gratitude, and we should say Rea Leboga for the work that you do. You are the unnoticed and unsung heroes. Sometimes you are not liked very much, and I should say that when we have to pay taxes, we don't like you very much, but we know we have to pay our taxes. We are also grateful for the assistance that SARS received in the formative years from other countries, from the Swedish Tax Authority, the Australian and Canadian revenue authorities, and many others that have assisted. It is like as we drafted our own constitution, we went around the world to see what other constitutions existed. And so we learned from them. And having learned from them, we do believe, and some people do say, that we produce one of the best constitutions in the world. And similarly, as they assisted us, we were able to build revenue authority that has, as I said earlier, been seen to be one of the best in the world. Now, this assistance helped to accelerate the pace of learning for SARS during the early period. Unfortunately, none of these lessons could not have prepared SARS to protect itself against a well-orchestrated capture by self-serving individuals and some organizations who were not only unbothered by the higher purpose I spoke about, but were in fact hostile to it. So what we learned didn't teach us and arm us with a way in which we could protect our SARS when it was under attack. In 2018, I instituted the Commission of Inquiry headed by Judge Nugent to investigate the state of the revenue collector that had deteriorated. It had started going down from a world-class institution to one in which taxpayers and the public no longer had any trust. So this wonderful institution that had been built over the years had started going down, and we therefore had to need to have a closer look at what was happening. We saw an unfortunate decline in revenue performance in the years 2014 to 2018. It became clear to us that this important institution, this very valuable institution of our democracy, had been repurposed to serve the interests of corrupt and politically connected people. The most damning finding of the Nugent Commission was that there was a massive failure of governance and integrity here at SARS, facilitated by the deliberate dismantling of well put together and tried and tested organizational arrangements that supported the work of SARS. I undertook to implement all the recommendations that were made by the Nugent Commission of Inquiry. I know that the Ministry of Finance itself, the National Treasury, and SARS have implemented many of the Commission's recommendations. And through that whole process of implementing those recommendations, SARS is being rebuilt and it is regaining the stature that it used to occupy. The few that are outstanding will continue to receive the attention of my administration and the relevant institutions, and our commissioner here continues to implement many of those recommendations. And I do wish to thank Judge Nugent and his team, Professor Katz, and the outstanding evidence leader, Advocate Carol, who's here, for doing an excellent job in providing the recommendations that have assisted Commissioner Kiswetter and his team to restore not only the integrity, but also the standing, the trustworthy standing of SARS, to improve efficiency and to regain public trust amongst taxpayers, the traders, and a number of other stakeholders. Now, for SARS to deliver optimally on its work, it is critical that all taxpayers and traders comply with their legal obligations, for we all have legal obligations as a people, because taxes are the lifeblood of a nation. And without it, the government becomes paralyzed, and the government would be nothing but an empty shell unless we pay our taxes. So for SARS to operate optimally, it is important that they get the cooperation of all of us. Over the past few years, SARS has been accessing data locally and across the world to help the organization to detect and act against non-compliant taxpayers and criminal syndicates. And before that capture moment, it had set up a creme de la creme system, and that was destroyed. And it has been rebuilt, and it is in rebuilt mode now, and it will be able to execute precisely what I've also said. To those compliant taxpayers who meet their legal obligations, I must say that we salute you as South Africans, because it is our duty as citizens to ensure that we continue paying our taxes and not to dodge them. It is your compliance that enables SARS to fulfill its mandate of collecting all the revenue that is needed, because it is through this revenue that we are able to support the life of South Africans. The path of transformation of SARS to what it is today has been a long journey, and I do hope that any one of you seated here will be able to write the story of the modern SARS of 25 years. I do hope that you've already penned down a book of some sorts just to tell the story of the last 25 years. The organization went through many iterations, remodeling and operational shifts, and will continue to do so as a growing and maturing institution. And now we can say it is maturing very, very nicely, having shaken off the shackles of capture that had encircled it. From the early days of SIACA, which transformed SARS from an inwardly focused administrative orientation through to the first phase of technological modernization, we now have a SARS that aspires to be a smart, modern institution that is beyond reproach, which is trusted and which is admired by all. SARS is an excellent example of a government entity that is efficient and that is operating at the top of its game. And that we can credit to yourself as the leader of SARS here, and to your colleagues as well. The encouraging progress of rebuilding SARS is evidence that it is possible to arrest and rebuild ourselves from the deep damage we suffered during state capture. And there are a number of institutions which, having been captured, are in rebuild mode now. Some of that will take years, but we are really glad that this one, which is the real nerve center of the life of South African people, we have been able to rebuild and continue to do so. So I'd like to encourage SARS to continue in the vein and to inspire other government departments and entities to follow suit. And I'd like other government departments to come here. You suggested, someone suggested, it was the Deputy Minister who said, we should get the cabinet to come and meet in your Bridge Command Operation Center so that we can see as the full cabinet exactly what is possible to be built and created within a good budget administration process. I would like to bring my cabinet here to come and have a look. Because it just shows that it is possible to build an absolutely world-class institution. And I'd like to see as many of our government institutions, from the presidency right down as well, that we should know that we are capable as South Africans of excellence. We we are good at it when we put our mind to it, and we can do it. What SARS has been able to achieve is a clear demonstration that it can be done. So I'm truly grateful that we have an institution like SARS, and that just not just exists for itself, but it exists for the people of South Africa and supports our life as South Africans. It is crucial that SARS continues to pursue its mandate also without fear or favor or prejudice, because you happen to stand at a position where sometimes what you do angers other people. And as I said, nobody ever wants to pay so much to give money to government. But at the same time, you're doing an essential job that has to be done. To you, Commissioner Kisvetter, and to more than 12,500 SARS staff members, I wish to thank you on behalf of all of us as South Africans for the work that you do. We are all proud of this institution that plays such an important role and a pivotal role in the life of our nation. And I'd like to say this is a happy moment, happy 25th anniversary to the South African Revenue Service, and we thank you also for having put yourself as an institution at a position where you are able to work so well with all other institutions. You work well with the National Prosecuting Agency, I know that. You work well with the Auditor General. You work well with a variety of other organizations, much as you are independent, but you also know that you are accountable to the various other institutions that operate in our country. You are a fine institution. Keep this institution as fine as it is. Happy 25th year anniversary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for those wonderful and encouraging words and for gracing us with your presence today. For thousands of our employees, it has made this event extra special. Thank you to all our invited guests, former and current colleagues and employees. Whilst the capture of SARS, as you correctly pointed out, has eroded in many ways the gains that has been built, it is indeed the remarkability of the foundational work and the commitment of thousands of men and women who have remained here throughout this period that have provided the much needed resilience and minimized the immeasurable loss. And I say immeasurable loss, I was saying earlier that the Nugent report could not capture the extent of the damage that has been exacted on SARS. You had to be here to live it and to see it and to witness it. So a huge thank you to everyone who has contributed to the past 25 years in whatever way you have. Over the next 25 years, Mr. President, and beyond, we have a huge responsibility to resist any effort from any quarter to defend this crown jewel of our democracy. Taking SARS for granted will be to our gravest detriment. We have the inordinate privilege, but also the sacrosanct accountability to advance the independence, the integrity, and the institutional capability of SARS. The Revenue Authority must be allowed to act and fulfill its mandate, and to do so beyond any reproach, with unquestionable integrity. A special thank you to our current employees, many of whom have been with us the entire journey and even before, others who have joined along the way, and those who I anticipate would still join us over the next 25 years. And of course, a special acknowledgement to our families and loved ones, without whose support our work would just be so much harder. To the phenomenal teams who have worked under pressure to successfully bring together today the arrangements leading up to it, I always find words inadequate to express one's appreciation, but let me just say, for your unstinted contribution and sacrifice, we truly appreciate that. I also want to acknowledge every single taxpayer whose lives we touch, hopefully not only by collecting taxes from you, but especially each of you knowing that your tax contributions has direct impact on the lives of South Africans. Allow me to be the mouthpiece of the most vulnerable among South Africans and express unqualified appreciation for the transformative impact on them that is made possible by tax revenues. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this morning with us. We now have a small ceremony as it is appropriate at a birthday party, and I'll hand back to our program director, Dr. Khabo, to tell us.
Thank you, Commissioner, for the beautiful ending reflection. So now we are going to start our moment, and I see the gentlemen are ready in action. We have a special moment where a cake has arrived, and our Silver Jubilee cake has arrived, and I would appreciate if it can be ushered to the table so that our Commissioner and our President can be able to do the cutting for us. Over to you, Commissioner and the President.
This is what I came for.
Yes. A round of applause for the cutting of the cake. Thank you so much, Commissioner. We have come to the end of our ceremony, our session. Thank you very much to everybody who graced us today with your presence, especially the leadership and our guests, and also our people on the line who just really joined us until now. I really appreciate you so much. What is key now, we're going to have a photo session with our President and our Commissioner. So I would like them to join us as we allow other people to move, and then we are able to allow you to sit on the second row so that we can have a picture with everybody on the room, if it's okay with you. They stay. Everybody's gonna stay. Yes, you are the only ones who are gonna move. We are in the classroom. We have come to the end of our session. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you so much. Drive safely. Thank you.
Fellow South Africans, I'm addressing you.
All your years of paying tax, you still wonder, why does it matter?
It is true that we are facing a great emergency.
It matters now more than ever. It matters to those who are exposed to harm, to keep us away from it. the ones that leave behind all that they love. Your tax matters to them. Those who spend endless hours standing on their feet to care for others. It matters to those who are always at the heart of any crisis and our future generations. It matters to those who put so much love into giving selflessly to each and every family living on the breadline. It matters to all of us. To all taxpayers, pay your fair share. Do it for your nation. Your tax matters.
President moves out. Can we allow the president